Fat is not bad. So getting in healthy fat, especially for women, is critical. And here's why. If you look at the hormone pathways, right? If you take them apart and go into the lab and really look at them, from a science perspective, the building block of all hormones is cholesterol.
Dr. Tasneem Bhatia, better known as Dr. Taz, is a board-certified physician specializing in integrative and emergency medicine, in pediatrics and prevention with expertise in women's health, weight loss, and nutrition. The author of several best-selling books, and she's been featured everywhere from The Today Show, Access Hollywood, The Dr. Oz Show, Good Morning America, Doctors, and so many other media outlets. She's a contributing editor to Prevention Magazine and an assistant professor at Emory University. I would love to talk about the weight gain that's associated with menopause. This is something that hasn't been talked about very much, and it's something that millions of women experience, and there is a solution. And your book is all about education and real world solutions, practical solutions.
Yes.
Is what I love so much about it. So let's talk about the weight gain associated with menopause. What's going on there?
This is something that continues to bring women into the practice. Women will pull me, on a street corner, so frustrated and so upset by the fact that they're gaining weight. And they usually see it first with a lot of belly fat. And the next thing you know, their size is changing and they're completely distraught. But here's what's happening. And this is where I bristle a little bit about the nature of a lot of the weight loss conversations right now, because what's really happening is that anytime, any age, honestly, when you experience a hormone shift, your blood sugar levels are changing. So when estrogen drops, when progesterone drops, if your thyroid shifts, if your cortisol shifts, right, it's going to have a direct impact on what blood sugar and insulin is doing. That in turn determines weight. So we have all these people, under eating, over exercising, over medicating, doing everything they think they're supposed to be doing to lose weight, but not understanding that at the end of the day, it comes down to managing blood sugar, managing insulin, and understanding the direction their hormones are going in. So for women in perimenopause and menopause, and remember, perimenopause is early now, it can drop all the way down to about 33, 34, and then last all the way into your 50s. Menopause we define as no period for 1 year. For this entire segment of women where their blood sugar is shifting and changing, they're not being given the tools to really own that shift and to own that change, and then be able to implement strategies that are going to work. And I'm right there with them. I've been through this too. Like, what just happened? Why can't I put these pants on? And so I'm really, really empathetic about this conversation. And it's, a lot of women already have so much shame around weight and so much guilt around weight that we need to blow this open and help them understand that this is a chemistry issue and we've got to solve the chemistry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, of course, what we tend to do is berate ourselves, beat ourselves up. I'm not doing enough. Let me work harder. And instead of, let's take a peek inside. And also just the revelation that my hormones are in fact changing, and my hormones are controlling my metabolic health and this kind of outpicturing of what I'm seeing in the mirror. And you mentioned how, these changes can affect things like our thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
And also our gut health as well. And this is one of the things that you talk a lot about.
Yes.
So how about this connection with our gut health and menopause and how that might play into weight gain?
I continue to be amazed and fascinated by how interconnected the body is. And I feel like we do an incredible disservice when we try to talk about things in one lane. Our hormones are directly impacted by what our gut is doing, and our gut is impacted by what our hormones are doing. I often take, patients or, whoever is willing to listen down this journey of what actually happens to a hormone. If we talk about estrogen, for example, right? Estrogen depends on the gut to be metabolized effectively, to then be wrapped up by the gallbladder, excreted out into the colon, and then metabolized in the right way. Then estrogen works for us, right? It gives us our skin, our hair, our weight, where we want it, allows us to focus and think and all the things we want to do. But if the gut is not working well, then that estrogen is not metabolized effectively. So you have an issue now with many of the concepts that I'm sure you've heard of, estrogen dominance and all of these different things that make women feel miserable. Let's flip it. On the other hand, when we lose our hormones, when we see declining levels of estrogen and progesterone, the gut gets more sluggish. It doesn't empty as well. It doesn't metabolize your food very well. In fact, when progesterone drops, and I see this in perimenopausal women all the time, when progesterone drops, there's an overgrowth of candida in the gut, which is a yeast that we have naturally. But when the hormone levels shift and change, that level goes up dramatically. And high candida in turn drives up blood sugar, drives up insulin, causes us to gain weight, creates those sugar cravings, and can leave us mentally unfocused as well. So again, this interplay between the gut and hormones is one that is so critical to understand. And I'm not new at this. Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, they talked about this 5,000 years ago. They talked about the importance of dialing into the gut. They tagged the liver into this. The liver was a part of the digestive system. And they stressed how critical it was to have that unit healthy to navigate many different systems in the body, including hormone health for sure. So their assessments were, oh, you're having a hormone shift? Please go drink this, go eat this. Let's improve your gut in these ways, not, oh, let me go give you a hormone, or let's try to increase your hormones or decrease them or whatever else that, we talk about today.
So what you're saying is that the health of our gut, and in particular, if we're talking about perimenopause, menopause, is impacting the symptoms that a woman would experience. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly what I'm saying. That when our gut is unhealthy, we don't have the right bacteria, we're not breaking food down very well, we're not moving things through the gut the way we should be, there is a host of symptoms that become exaggerated, especially when our hormones start to do whatever they're going to do. Yes, for sure. Our gut impacts our hormones, impacts how we feel, and really determines sort of the intensity with which you're going to feel any of the different symptoms.
Now, this is something that a lot of women experience just with their usual cycle, that their digestion might change.
Yep.
Right? But that's one of those things that's not really talked about, might be overlooked, but that's indicating how hormones can influence the digestive process. So what are some of the things that happen potentially for a woman during her cycle? Diarrhea for some women, constipation for others. Is there like a spectrum?
There is a spectrum, and you nailed some of it, and it really depends on the woman. But let's talk about what's happening on your cycle. So just like perimenopause and menopause, as younger girls approach their cycle, and this even applies to teenagers, honestly. This is not just a conversation for women in their 30s and 40s. But as you're approaching your cycle, you're seeing the decline in estrogen, right? You're seeing the decline in progesterone as well. That decline exaggerates the 7 days before you actually bleed, right? So that's a very low hormone time for women. That's when a lot of women feel unhinged, right? They have more anxiety. They're having trouble going to the bathroom. They're experiencing more reflux maybe, or they're having a lot of abdominal pain or even pelvic pain. This is often when, we hear that they have these symptoms. The first issue is many women don't connect their gut symptoms that they're experiencing with the fact that they're in a particular phase of their cycle. So for everyone listening, I would say that's the first step. Where are you in your cycle when you experience many of these different symptoms? And I think that's really helpful to understand and know. Most of them, from my clinical experience, is most women are experiencing these things in like that day 21 through about 28 or so, assuming you have a 28-day cycle. That's the low estrogen, that's the low progesterone sort of time frame. And it can present as constipation, not able to go to the bathroom. It can present as diarrhea, going too frequently. It can present as bloating. I have so many women coming to me like, why do I look pregnant like around this time of the, time of the month? And again, it's that frustration, feeling uncomfortable, staying home, not wanting to engage, in the outside world because you just don't feel very good. Now, a more serious ramification of all of this stuff is that there are women that experience really difficult gut symptoms throughout their cycle. And those are often women with endometriosis. And endometriosis is a condition where the uterine lining overgrows, kind of latches on to the intestinal wall. And women that are experiencing sort of this ramp up of their GI symptoms around their cycle should be thinking about endometriosis as something that they should be asking their doctors about or thinking about or screening for sure. So again, the gut, for me in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, I wrote about this in 2014 in my book, The Belly Fix, but the gut is really ground zero. It is ground zero for hormone health. It's ground zero for mental health, and it's ground zero for weight. And so if we're really going to have a good conversation about how to be healthy and how to balance your hormones and how to lose weight, we can't leave the gut out of this conversation at all.
Right. Our health is centered around this, and of
Very
course
much.
the Hippocrates quote is jumping into my mind. All disease begins in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he say that? All that time ago, this is one of those things, but today we're circling back to what's really logical. You mentioned the Chinese medicine system, for example, Ayurveda. This is something that's deeply paid attention to. And I'm grateful that this is happening now and that you're, putting out this information to support people, because even when we're saying this though, and here's my question for you, that gut health is important. How do we do it? I think, and if you could share some of the things we might want to avoid, I think it's more so about what we're not doing.
Correct.
Than what we're doing, what we're adding in. So what are some of the things that we should probably avoid if we want to take care of our gut health? And also, again, leaning into having a more graceful experience with menopause, less symptoms, and also just overall with the cycle, with the menstrual cycle.
Definitely. And, I'm going to dive into this, and I'm going to start though with some ideas that for many people listening might be just gut 101. Like they've heard this, they know this, but it's like we can't have this conversation without at least re-emphasizing these very critical central points. The reason the gut in today's environment is falling apart, right? The reason we're seeing so much inflammation, most of which is coming from the gut, is really because of our environment, right? Yeah. We have a more toxic environment. We have more depleted soil than we've had in probably a generation. We have more glyphosate floating around, even when we're trying to buy organic, right? We have more glyphosate floating around in our food, in our water, in our soil, in our air, all of which impacts the gut. So the gut needs a lot of support, maybe more than it needed 100 years ago even. And to support the gut, we have to be super proactive. And that proactive sort of strategy comes into being hyper vigilant a little bit about the quality of food that you're eating. A lot of people will sit and debate, like, should I do gluten-free? Should I do this? Should I do that? It's really about food quality first, more than anything else. So ditch the fast food. We know there's a lot of glyphosate there in that particular food and food sourcing. That's the reason for the obesity epidemic. So we have to get rid of a lot of the fast foods. We have to get rid of a lot of the processed and packaged foods. That's a good starting point for everyone. I think the second is learn to replace some of those things if they're in your diet with real food. Just getting into the habit of eating real food. There's so many young people that I meet, even young women, who don't eat real food. They're grabbing a bar, they're doing, maybe a smoothie here and there, they're doing all this food that is highly, highly processed. So that's the second sort of thing that I would recommend. I think next is let's talk about what we need to actually bring in. There are a lot of sort of outdated, in fact, I was doing something this morning for an article, and I was laughing at some of the outdated myths around nutrition and gut health that still linger in our consciousness for whatever reason. Fat is not bad. So getting in healthy fat, especially for women, is critical. And here's why. If you look at the hormone pathways, right? If you, take them apart and go into the lab and really look at them, from a science perspective, the building block of all hormones is cholesterol. So when we start to pursue these very low-fat diets or low-fat, fat-free alternatives, we essentially are crashing our hormones because we're not providing the body with this fundamental building block for building things like estrogen and progesterone. I'm a child of the 80s. I lived that one, right? Diet Coke and fat-free popcorn. And I shouldn't have been shocked that my hormones crashed by the time I was 26 or 27. So I think that is something that I want everyone to embrace. We need fat. And when we eat fat, we actually eat less. We bring that blood sugar down. And in turn, we help to regulate this epidemic of insulin resistance. So bringing in the fat, I think, is really critical. The second is, and I don't know this 100%. I'm still trying to understand the why. I can tell you what's happening in the exam room. One of the things that we're seeing over and over again is an epidemic of fat malabsorption, which means that our pancreas has been hit. I think it's been hit by the chemical load. That's my sort of working theory at the moment. But patient after patient is coming in and they are spilling fat in their stool. They're not able to digest it. They're not able to break it down. And so they have this issue of fat malabsorption, which means that even sometimes when they're making good choices, they're losing their nutrients in their stool. So the other thing, in addition to good fats that we need to bring in, are digestive enzymes, because for whatever reason, whatever we want to blame, whether it's stress or the environment or the confluence of the two, our bodies are not able to process good food the way we used to. So bringing in a good digestive enzyme, something that has like ox bile and lipase in it to break fats down effectively, is a game changer. And it's a game changer when it comes to hormones, because now you have, the ability to absorb your fat, absorb the nutrients you need to build hormones, right? Chinese medicine talked a lot about hormone building, and it was about nutrients and fat and protein and some of these essential ideas. Now you have that stuff and you can find your way to healthy hormone balance. So that to me is the second thing that needs to really come in. I think last but certainly not least is thinking about the microbiome practically. Do you take a probiotic? Do you drink a probiotic drink? How are you repopulating your gut bacteria so that it can do the work it needs to do, like eat up estrogen, balance progesterone, reduce candida, all of these different things. So those are three things I think that are very actionable that, folks can go out there and actually, go do while they're on the journey. And I say it's a journey because it's not easy to be like, okay, I'm not going to eat fast food anymore, right? While you're on this journey of learning to eat healthier in a more clean way, and even how to get back in the kitchen. I feel like that's a very overwhelming thing for so many people today, but that's a journey. So while you're on that journey, do some of this other stuff. It's going to make a difference.
This is huge. Like, we talk about hormones in this very kind of superficial way, right? But are you providing your body with the building blocks to make these things? And, our bodies are incredibly resilient and we adapt.
Right.
A lot of our disease symptoms are adaptations.
Absolutely.
In a huge way. And again, just getting back to the very, very basics, provide your body with the raw materials. Now, you mentioned providing these healthy fats, but the angle that you provided that we haven't talked much about is, are you absorbing it?
Right.
You might be spending money on these fancy pants, high quality fats, and not actually getting the bang for the buck that you're looking for. And this goes to, you mentioned the pancreas, obviously the microbiome, again, the health of our gut. Are we absorbing these nutrients? Also, and some of these things are epidemics as well, liver health. Right? Lipase production, your gallbladder, which is kind of like, if we're talking about digesting fats and bile, it's kind of like a little sidekick, like a little Robin.
It's important
to, Batman being the liver, the Dark Knight. The liver is incredible, but a lot of folks are getting their gallbladder removed. And I just was talking with somebody last week and she was having difficulty digesting certain foods. And I'm just like, when you had the procedure done, did your doctor tell you to start taking a lipase enzyme or just, some enzymes or something? He's like, no, just, took it out. Oh, well, just, you don't need it. Take it out, go about your way. And then suffer certain symptoms as a result. And so again, but it's not looking at what caused the issue with the gallbladder in the first place. Even if we remove the gallbladder, which is a symptom, the inflammation that is happening there, are we changing the behavior so that we can actually experience health? And so this is circling me back to asking you about, so you mentioned probiotics. Now, what about prebiotics, right? What about providing the substrate or the environment for those probiotics to flourish?
Prebiotics are just as important as probiotics. And, there's been a lot of debate about probiotics too, right? Like, can you really take a probiotic? Can you really shift your microbiome? Does it really impact what's happening down there? Prebiotics, are kind of the new frontier where we're like, if you provide your body with the prebiotic foods and supplements and those type of things, and we can talk about those in just a minute, then you're allowing the gut bacteria to grow and flourish the way it's supposed to do. I feel like it's a combination of both, right? At the end of the day. And, people are probably tired of hearing this, but You get prebiotics from your food. You get probiotics from your food. When we have food diversity, right? When we are changing what we eat, rotating out our breakfast, lunches, and dinners, then we're really presenting the body, the gut in particular, with a lot of different pre and probiotics. But when we have the same dinner, the same lunch, the same breakfast over and over again for 30 years, right? We're not going to have that diversity that the body needs to be able to do what it's supposed to do. So prebiotics are thankfully getting more attention and more press. I think that's fantastic. And they are a player when it comes to overall gut health. But again, it's like a symphony. We need everybody showing up to play their instrument. So we need the prebiotics. We need the probiotics. We need the gut lining to be intact. We need digestive enzymes. We need the right amount of acid. And when all of those guys are working together, then the body does what it's supposed to do. Now, having said that, people are like, whoa, this is really overwhelming. What do you want me to do? But the body, and I don't know if you feel this way, but the body's actually really incredible and very simple. Sometimes when you make one change, everything else changes around it. So you don't have to do 20 things. You have to do 3 good things to really get the benefit of really having holistic health and really impacting every system in the body.
I love that you mentioned, you didn't give like a cookie cutter, eat Jerusalem artichokes. And that's going to be, the truth is really every real food functions as a prebiotic in some way. It's the diversity of these things. And the diversity is what's suffering in our diet. And me working in fitness early on in my career, I saw this, I didn't realize this was happening, but when we're trying to quote, get healthy, we'll be preparing our meals, but they're usually the same stuff again, over and over and over again.
We're all guilty of that. I do that. I'm busy running around. Where's my protein smoothie? Same 2 scoops, same bananas. You know what I mean? I'm with everybody on this journey. I am just as guilty of all of this stuff, but it's a journey, right? And I feel like every day I get better. Every year I get better. I get more creative. It's very easy for me. In fact, I used to do it to send someone to the grocery store to go get our groceries and bring them back. Or now we have Instacart, right? You can do this, but I have now been deliberate about showing up at the store, picking my vegetables, picking my fruits, planning my recipes. Why? There's a reason why. There's so much nutritional value and emotional and energetic value to being able to prepare your food and prepare food for your family, and my family acts and thinks differently when food is prepared elsewhere versus when food is prepared at home. There's a difference. And you can't really reach biodiversity that we're talking about or, really changing things up if you don't invest a certain amount of time into what are you going to prepare or eat in the week ahead, right? Most of us are just grabbing and going or running. We're stressed. We're tired. You have children. I have children. It's 50,000 things all the time, right? But if we can stop for just a moment and just take an hour to think about what are the meals going to look like for the next 3 or 4 days and try to make them a little bit diverse, then you're providing your body with that biodiversity without having to think through, wait, am I on the right probiotic? Am I healing my gut lining? Am I taking the right enzyme, right? That's overwhelming. And it's weird because I've shifted. I've done this for now 15, almost 20 years, seeing patients in our clinics for 15 years. We've seen a lot of patients. We have a big team, and I continue to learn from each and every one of them. I feel so blessed. But like I've shifted to where in the beginning it was like, take this and this and this and this and this and this and this because it's all good, right? To what will your body need that will allow it to work efficiently and allow one thing to impact 10 others, right? That's why we always start with the gut. The gut is the most efficient metabolic engine, hormone engine, all of it. And then if we think like Eastern medicine and you include the liver in that conversation around the gut and digestive health, then that is the starting point for everybody. And while everyone's out there debating HRT and deciding which form is the best and whether to do a pellet or a troche or this or that, I feel like they're missing the real conversation. And the real conversation is start here. And then you can decide all the rest.
Yeah. A great sentiment is that a diverse gut is a healthy gut.
Yes.
And there are so many studies on this now. I love the studies that have identical twins
Yes.
and looking at gut health. And
Yep.
a lot of this was compiled from my hometown in St. Louis, so St. Louis University, WashU, and seeing, higher ratios of certain types of bacteria leaning towards a microbiome that is more indicative of obesity and diabetes and things like that. But the number one thing to improve that diversity is increasing the diversity of foods that you're eating.
Absolutely.
And a little other trick for your mind. I love looking at it as every food that we eat, you're eating that food's microbiome.
Yes.
And you're taking that on,
yes,
right? So like,
absolutely.
let me get this data from this plum over here. Let me get this data from this cucumber. Let me get this data from this kimchi, and just like looking at it like that and making it a little bit more of a game, a food game.
It's also important. And, I think our ancestors did it well, right? Our medical ancestors and cultures before us too, because people ate seasonally, they rotated what they ate. They didn't have food available, same foods available all the time. And everything had a really rich microbiome. Bread had a microbiome. Bread today doesn't have a microbiome anymore, right? So everything had bacteria that worked to our benefit, right? But again, if you're going to deplete the soil, if you're going to add chemicals, if you're going, to transport food across, great distances and hold it in storage for long periods of time, that microbial quality is going down and down and down and down.
Bread today, like you said, it doesn't have a real microbiome, a natural microbiome input, but it definitely has some glyphosate. You mentioned glyphosate earlier.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit about what that is for people that might not be aware?
Definitely, yeah. Glyphosate is one of the major ingredients and derivatives of Roundup, which is the pesticide that's used pretty much universally now globally with farming. And what's happened is that, many of us that think we're buying organic or choosing organic, glyphosate maybe not being used directly on those plants. However, there's so much cross-contamination now that in practice, in the exam room, we see high glyphosate in the majority of our patients. Now, the issue is not everyone's equally sensitive to it, right? There are some people that are more sensitive than others. The beauty of being able to do labs and data and genetics and all this other stuff that we do is that we can sort of do all this matching, right? These genes, super sensitive to it, have more inflammation, have more issues overall. These guys can tolerate it to a point, but over time it's going to catch up with them. So glyphosate can live in our cells. It lives in our intestinal lining. And one of the things we've seen is that it may be one of the primary causes of this whole phenomenon of leaky gut or intestinal malabsorption, right? Which is why we don't absorb our foods and break our foods down effectively and all these other things. We are concerned about glyphosate. I don't know how much we can really do about it. Here's what we can do internally, right? The external environment, we each have only so much ability to manage and control. But internally, I think, again, if you are choosing your foods wisely, you're reducing kind of that toxic load, the load of processed or fast foods, because restaurant foods do seem to have a higher load than foods that we're preparing on our own. If you can start to make some of those changes, then you are decreasing your exposure to glyphosate and you're optimizing your body's ability to remove it. Going back to the miracle of the human body, right? It kind of is its own laundromat or detoxing machine, so to speak, whatever the right words are, because chemicals come in and if things are working well, chemicals go back out, right? They don't store, they don't live there. But when the body's weak or if the load is too high, that set point obviously is disrupted, right? And now you're storing those chemicals, you're holding on to them, and it's disrupting your hormones, it's disrupting your mental health, it's disrupting so many different processes in the body. So again, it starts with you. Unfortunately, I wish there was a pill or a quick fix, but it starts with you, and it starts with you making small changes so that you can gradually reduce your exposure to that to the best of your ability.
This is so good. A lot of these newly invented chemicals, in particular, we're talking about glyphosate, they have this lipophilic connection, and our fat cells are really intelligent at storing stuff, especially foreign things your body isn't necessarily sure about processing. Our liver functions in much the same way as a protector and processor, detoxifier. But it is one of those things that is there's this new category called obesogens,
Mhm.
right? These
Right.
obesity causing agents, and glyphosate, and this is according to the IARC,
Mhm.
it's denoted to be a class 2A carcinogen,
Mhm.
right? So that means it probably causes cancer in humans. Not absolutely, but
Can't say
probably,
absolute.
and it's just
Right.
like, we are living right now in a time of great experiment in
Mhm.
our food supply, and we don't know so many of the long-term ramifications.
Right.
The best thing that we can do, as you've mentioned, is focus on eating real food, focus on quality control, which is going to require you to make a few more meals at home. Ideally, do your best. And also, I love that you said this multiple times, that it's a journey.
It is.
And every time you say it, I feel like Lord of the Rings vibes, like you get to choose your character. Sometimes you're Frodo, sometimes you're,
Right.
Aragorn, sometimes you're Smeagol,
Absolutely.
But I want to circle back. You talked about this, and this is another big issue that needs a lot more attention, and there are solutions for this, but estrogen dominance.
Yes.
So we have this range. We have estrogen dominance to rapidly increasing rates of PCOS,
Mm-hmm.
for example. And this all has to do, bottom line, foundationally with our hormones.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. And it's actually a great segue from the conversation we're just having about chemicals, because the rates of PCOS are growing up dramatically, right? There's this androgenization of women, right? Higher DHT, higher free testosterone, higher DHEAS, while we're also seeing sort of this estrogenization of men, where we're seeing higher estrogen levels, higher estrone or stored estrogen in men. And much of this shifting of the hormone landscape, I believe, and what I see in practice, may trace its way back to our chemical load. So when we're talking about estrogen dominance, it is connected to this idea of gut-liver health, right? Because the healthier you can make your gut with the right range of bacteria, in fact, there's studies that show this, that there are certain microbes that are responsible for the conjugation of estrogen, meaning whether it's my estrogen or estrogen I'm getting from somewhere, even estrogen from the environment, right? The exogenous estrogen that we talk about. If my gut is working well, it's going to grab that, it's going to break it up, chop it up, and it's going to get rid of it. It's going to go out through my colon or however else, right? I'll lower that load down. But estrogen dominance is this idea that instead of that happening, we're holding on to estrogen metabolites. I actually call them dirty hormones. That's sort of my term for them. So these are things like high levels of estrone, high levels of 17-hydroxyprogesterone, high levels of DHT. These are all hormone metabolites, not just the estradiol and the progesterone that everyone's going and getting checked at their doctor's office and hearing, quote unquote, they're fine, right? These are the metabolites that are building up in our bodies that we need to be aware of. And that's where estrogen dominance comes from. And it looks like everything from brain fog, migraines, breast tenderness, gaining weight, because the other pattern with this is that when estrogen dominance happens, insulin goes up. When androgen dominance, the other dirty hormones, the DHT and all those guys, when they go up, insulin goes up. So we've got this metabolism of hormone issue driving up insulin, driving up blood sugar, causing everyone to gain weight, men and women, honestly, but definitely, women are quicker to notice it and react to it. And that in turn is causing all kinds of angst. And what's our answer? Our answer is more medication right now, right? So estrogen dominance, if, everybody listening could latch on to that idea. I actually was listening to something recently. I got so upset because it was a female health expert who I won't name, who's like, estrogen dominance isn't real. It's only not real if you're not looking for it. If you're just going to check an estradiol level or, day 3 estrogen or day 20, all the stuff that women hear all the time, you're not going to catch it. It's very real when you look at the metabolites of hormones, or if you don't even want to do any testing and you want to listen to what the woman in front of you is saying, it's real. Estrogen dominance is the precursor for many estrogen-based diseases. So instead of waiting for disease, identification, like, oh, you have a clear mammogram, fantastic, come back next year. Wait, you have breast cancer. Instead of waiting for that whole empty gap, if you're looking instead for dirty hormones and thinking instead about hormone metabolism and how the stuff is breaking down and marrying that to this idea of gut liver health, that will not happen. You won't go from normal to abnormal in the span of a year because you'll be tracking and chasing and understanding what your body's doing with your hormones. And this is relevant again. I've said this, once, I'm going to say it again because I continue to get annoyed by it. This is our hormones that we're making on our own, in addition to hormones somebody else might be slapping on us, right? This conversation applies to both. So that's where estrogen dominance, is widely misunderstood, underdiagnosed, but such a missed opportunity. Because if we helped our younger women identify it early on, then they could eat for it. They could take the right herbs and supplements for it. They could exercise for it. They could screen for it, and they could understand what their risk is 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road for an estrogen-based disease.
Yeah. And this goes back to the same root cause and treatment, which is, how's your gut health? Are you providing the building blocks to make your respective hormones?
Right.
And are you flirting with some dirty hormones, right? And that, I love that you tied in the connection with insulin, because now that that's in the mix, it can exacerbate the problem and create this vicious circle,
Totally.
of aromatization. For men, for example, your testosterone is getting grabbed and converted into estrogen,
Right.
and you've got this circulating insulin and, high blood glucose, and it just starts to feed into itself. It makes it harder to, regulate your blood sugar. It makes it harder to lose the fat. But if we, again, get to the root here, which you've mentioned several times already, which is focusing on our gut health, eating real food, providing the real nutrients to build the hormones. But we got to talk about the elephant in the room, all right? The big old pink elephant. This is that hidden thing. It doesn't have calories per se.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't something that we necessarily even acknowledge outside of a certain context, but stress. Stress is one of those things that impacts so many different aspects of our health. As a matter of fact, and we'll throw the study up for everybody to see, there was a meta-analysis done in JAMA, and they asserted that upwards of 60 to 80% of all physician visits today are for stress-related conditions.
Right.
Like, this stress input is such a big aspect. If we're talking about the hormone shift,
Right.
if we're talking about the experience of menopause in our society versus, and I would love if you can also make a little mention of some of these other cultures that don't experience menopause in the same way that the average woman does here in the United States. Let's talk about the stress factor here. How much is that playing in this process of perimenopause and menopause?
I think it's huge. One of the things that I love talking to women about is helping them understand that the hormone axis is not just about their ovaries or their uterus, right? It's about this entire feedback loop that actually begins in the brain and works its way down to many organs, including the thyroid, your adrenals, yes, your ovaries, yes, your uterus, all these different things. And the importance of understanding that it's all looped together is that when we are stressed, we are disrupting that loop. Right? That hormone balancing that I talk about, is not, again, just about giving you a hormone. It's about reestablishing integrity within that loop. So what does stress do? High stress, high cortisol will disrupt your sleep. As your sleep is disrupted, the hypothalamus, which lives up here in your brain, right, sits with the pituitary to regulate all of this stuff together, becomes inflamed, literally becomes inflamed, and can no longer do what it's supposed to do in terms of signaling. So the entire signaling gets thrown off. And instead, the body goes into kind of a fight or flight mode, and then you're trying to preserve. So the first symptom is high cortisol. The second shift is low progesterone. Then you get estrogen dominance. Somewhere in that mix, the thyroid crashes out too. So stress is a direct beeline to having a hormone shift that's not working in your favor. In the United States, if we're going to look at this country, and this is actually a global conversation, because I feel like this is happening to women all over the world because, many people are following our lifestyle. So this is very much global now, but in the United States in particular, that disruption of that hypothalamic pituitary axis, the HPA axis is what we call it, is happening earlier and earlier and earlier. So women are experiencing perimenopause earlier than we used to, menopause earlier than what they once did. And that in turn is having the implication of all the symptoms associated with those states, with both perimenopause and menopause. So that's one issue with stress. The second is cultural, and I don't have an easy fix for it, but the cultural perception of menopause, right? As women hit their 50s now, a lot of times they're coming out of one of the most stressful periods of their lives. I feel like 40s for women, late 30s into 40s. I called it Superwoman Syndrome in one of my books. It's one of the hardest times, right? They have families, they have careers. Both of those are kind of like, on this uptick. Oftentimes they have aging parents that they're managing as well. There's just a lot of responsibility for women. And so the stress in women that I see here in the United States, because we don't have community and extended families and, things like, a certain amount of vacation and stuff like that to be able to take care of those that are highly dependent on us is at an all-time high. So that's why if you look at those medical visits and some of that data, first of all, it's female dominant. A lot of it is very female dominant. Secondly, it's a lot of vague symptomology. And that's where women start to feel very dismissed in the medical system because they don't feel good, but it's very difficult to express. So it comes across as, I'm tired, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, and so the medical provider on the other end of that is, oh, you're just stressed. Oh, you're just anxious. Oh, you're just depressed. But there's a chemical shift happening to women under chronic stress. They are having inflammation of their entire hormone feedback loop. They're dropping their hormone levels earlier than ever before. And they're moving and beelining into estrogen dominance and insulin resistance. The other thing, if we got really microscopic about this idea, we know that cortisol and stress impacts the gut too, right? The gut acts completely differently. The microbiome shifts. A hamburger, you probably saw that study that came out. A hamburger when you're on vacation is metabolized completely differently than a hamburger that you grab and eat on the way to work, right? Two very different metabolic processes, same food. So we know that stress is a major player in this conversation for sure. And we have to help all of us, each of us, navigate what are your outlets? What's your self-care like? What's your community like? How are you living, making your choices that are in alignment with sort of what your body needs? And this is not something women are really taught to think about. I think, my daughter's 16. I feel like in her age group, they're talking a little bit more about wellness and self-care. She even says, Mom, I'm trying not to laugh. I have my self-care plan for the week. This is what it looks like. And I'm like, more power to you. I'm so proud of you. But at 16, at 20, at 30, I was just about like, oh, we got to get stuff done, So if we can help women understand that there is this point of balance where, yes, go conquer the world, go start families, go do everything you're supposed to do. But at the same time, on the schedule, on the calendar, what is your self-care? Where are you nurturing yourself, your soul, your spirit, having quiet time, doing the things you love? Because if that's not on there, you are driving on that highway towards inflammation and all the things we talked about much faster than what really needs to happen.
Yeah, it's equally, if not more important.
Totally.
To schedule that. If not, I think you're metaphorically digging yourself into a hole. And then once menopause actually hits, you find yourself looking up from the bottom of this hole. Is that a good analogy?
That's a great analogy. And time goes by fast, right? It goes by really fast. And I think that if we are not intentional with what we're doing year to year, decade to decade, you hit menopause. And I talk a lot in the book that menopause in other cultures is actually a journey up. Right? It's a rebirthing of yourself, right? And it's really where women should be in the fullest expression of themselves, right? They say what they want to say. They're doing things they want to do. They're in the careers of their choice, right? They are able to serve their community or their family. We're really the mentors for the women younger than us. And we should be like, sort of taking them in and guiding them along the way. That's what it should look like. That's what it did look like. Right? Women, once they hit their 50s and, Eastern cultures and older cultures were sort of held up as the pillar of the community. In fact, in some of the tribal cultures, these were your priestesses, right? These were your priestesses. These were your shamans. These were the people the community turned to, right? Instead, menopause today is seen as like, oh, I'm done. I'm expired. My time is up. And I think that in itself is a very disheartening sort of mantra to live by, right? But if you have been intentional along this journey, and if you've taken some time out, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, right? But if you've taken some time out to really dive into you and what your body needs, what your mind and your soul needs, and you've tried to put some of those pieces together, you get to this phase and it's incredible. You're actually excited because it's full of possibility. It's not, I'm done and I'm out of here. So we really want to shift and change our mindset to be like, this is where we're headed, right? And if we're doing these things along the way and dialing into these ideas and these concepts, then the conversation doesn't become about, do I or do I not need HRT? The conversation becomes instead about, how else can I optimize my health and what's next for me in terms of serving the community or a family or a project or whatever it is. And it's a really exciting time. It's one of the most freeing, most liberating times, I think, for women, or at least it should be. And instead, what many women are doing is just struggling with not feeling good, day in and day out. And that's just not fair.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Sometimes, and just contained within this is just having a moment to stop. And just with the busyness, all the things that you just said, we get wrapped up in that. And one of the most remarkable, you said a lot of cool stuff, but when you said, what do I need?
Mm-hmm.
That really hit me because your needs are going to be uniquely yours and that can change. But if you're not checking in with yourself and asking and being honest, what do I need? And giving yourself the permission to whatever that is to evoke some kind of reduction in the stress that you were automatically going to be accumulating in this world today. But you can find joy in that. It's so crazy. And I want to ask you about this because there are a lot of women who know this, that I should be taking a moment for myself, checking in. And I love how your daughter has her self-care already.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's that is amazing. But a lot of women do not do that. And
right.
They're just like, I know I should. And they might dabble in it, but then life happens. It's just,
right.
Why is that such a struggle?
The fundamental reason why that's a struggle for women is they feel guilty. Women, we bring it in from the day we're born. I think we leave with it unless we try to consciously change it. We have so much shame and guilt from generations that we walk around with. And so we are trying to undo so many years of, if you are not doing X, Y, and Z for X, Y, and Z, then you're not worthy. Right. So it's going back to shame and guilt and a lack of self-worth. And I talked about this in a TED talk I did back in 2017, because it was super interesting, like seeing the generational patterns of that. But we have not come out from that. And so I think for a woman to be like, hey, I need 2 hours to myself this weekend. I need to go get a massage. I want to go to lunch with my girlfriends. Can you handle X, Y, and Z if you're talking to a partner or if you're, trying to make plans for your children or whatever it is? We feel guilty. That's it. It's that simple. We always feel guilty. And I'm not sure how to change that because even I struggle with that to a certain extent as well. But here's what I remind myself, and I hope everybody will also remember, that the stronger we are, and the more rooted we are in what we stand for and what we believe in, the stronger everyone else around us is. And the stronger our families are, our communities are, our workplaces are. So we have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. It's not a luxury, it's a responsibility. And I think if women can remember that, then they will, first of all, be awed by the influence that they have in their environments. But secondly, be really amazed by how great they feel on any given day, no matter what's thrown at them.
Yeah. I love that reframing of something that is optional or be nice to do as a responsibility, the primary responsibility, because it bleeds over into everything else.
Everyone else.
We started this conversation talking about the connection with menopause and weight gain. Some people can experience an unexpected weight loss, right? There's a spectrum.
Right.
No two people are the same. But one of the things that I would love to talk with you about is the input or the connection with inflammation and weight gain, and its connection and weight gain and the association with menopause as well, inflammation is another huge component that we need to talk a little bit about.
All of this stuff is sort of like, I think about dominoes, right? So we have the hormone shifting and declining, right? Estrogen and progesterone and testosterone in particular. We have a gut that's slowing down, a microbiome that's shifting. We've talked a lot about the gut today. And what we understand is as these things are happening, blood sugar levels are rising, insulin is rising, which leads to weight gain. All of that, every single thing I just mentioned, the hormone decline, the gut shifting, the insulin rising, all of it, the weight accumulating, all of those things increase inflammation. And inflammation is this idea of the body kind of fighting itself, right? Sort of all sirens on, different things getting impacted and affected, and looks different on every woman. Some women have inflammation and it shows up as new onset joint pain or early arthritis, right? Other women have inflammation and it shows up as random rashes, like different skin disorders, or some have true mental health issues, which are actually symptoms of inflammation. So we know that inflammation is the precursor to the majority of the diseases that we deal with today in the clinical setting, whether we're talking about heart health, whether we're talking about autoimmune disease, whether we're talking about cancer, the precursor is inflammation. So we do want to understand actively in the exam room, right, what is happening at any given moment with any patient when it comes to their inflammation markers. So, as someone who is advocating for their health, you should be checking inflammation markers at least once or twice a year and understanding what that trend and pattern is, because that again is going to educate you as if maybe you're getting in trouble earlier and you just don't realize it. Many times we don't realize because, as you said, the body's very adaptive and we can pretend like something's fine when it's really not fine, right? So inflammation is a central idea. And I do think it's what leads to disease expression as women get further into their 50s and then into their 60s, because now we're seeing this all ramp back up. You can reverse inflammation. A lot of it, again, is reversed by the right diet, right? Good gut health, good, deep, consistent sleep is a very important component of reversing inflammation. And I think the other thing that we have to understand is that whether you do or don't decide to do hormone replacement therapy, when that therapy is not in the right spot, that can also be a source of inflammation. So inflammation is something I think that we have to chase. That's what we do in practices, in all our clinical practices at Center Spring MD. We're always looking for that, always trying to understand where somebody is with that. And here's what we understand about weight. Weight drives every inflammation marker up, every single one, and shows up in so many different ways. So the body burden of excessive weight, especially weight over about 20 pounds or so, is significant. And it can change how people think and feel and act and move and so many things. But the most frustrating part is to see that change, in that number from sort of tried and true strategies of weight loss can be very demotivating, because once you cross that 20-pound mark, losing weight, it has to be very consistent, deliberate, takes a long time to see that number on the scale change, but it does happen. It happens for every woman at every age. I've had women come in and when they finally got sort of their minds wrapped around, I'm getting rid of all sugar, I'm getting rid of all processed food, only eating clean foods. That's all they did. No diet plan, no medications, no gimmicky stuff. Over time, that's the key, took 4 to 6 months, over time lost 30 to 40 pounds, So it's possible. It's all possible. I don't want anyone subscribing to the theory that, oh my gosh, I'm getting older, so I am going to gain weight, or this is normal, right? It is possible to change all these things and to turn them around. You just have to change and adapt what you're doing.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned how, again, this becomes a vicious circle.
I know.
With
go round
our
and round.
fat cells, because, our fat cells are amazing, and just let's go show a little love. We tend to villainize our fat cells, but
we need them.
Exactly. It's part of
they
what
protect
helped us
your bones,
to
your brain, your hormones, all of it. We need them.
It's part of what helped us to evolve to be here as a species, our ability to store energy. But the amount of energy that we're packing into our fat cells today in our modern society is abnormal for our fat cells. And they'll send out essentially a false distress signal. And the root of inflammation, as far as like the active component of it, like what's creating the inflammation in our body, a lot of folks don't realize like that's your immune system,
Right.
right? And it's responding to what it perceives as a threat. And we tend to think about inflammation, I know that I did, as like something outward. You mentioned like rash on the skin
Right.
or, an injury or something like that. But we can have, and this is one of the things that you said for us to test for, systemic inflammation, inflammation that is not necessarily rooted in one problem.
Right.
And we have biomarkers that we can get analyzed. What are some of those biomarkers?
Oh my gosh, there's so many, but my favorites are just looking at a CRP, which is a C-reactive protein, a SED rate. The initials for that are ESR, usually a sedimentation rate. We will look in practice even at like a homocysteine level and try to understand what that number is. And those are all done with routine blood work. There's nothing fancy or expensive about any of that. On some patients, though, the inflammation, we're not able to pick up just with those 3 markers. So we do go deeper and we'll look at things like a TGF beta or a C4A, or we'll even look, to your point about the immune system, we'll look at immunoglobulin levels, because what you'll see with chronic inflammation, sometimes like your CRPs and your homocysteine and your SED rates are fine, they're normal, but your immunoglobulin levels are through the roof, or your C4A or TGF beta is through the roof. And so there is low-grade chronic inflammation. Another sort of hack or quick tip for everyone, because I know everyone's probably had a CBC done at some point. That's where you look at your white blood cell count and your hemoglobin and hematocrit. If you go back and look at your numbers, if your white blood cell count has been kind of chronically low in the 2s and 3s with repetitive blood draws, you have chronic inflammation. Those lower white counts are a sign of inflammation as well, too. So there's so many different ways to check in blood work. It's really not difficult. You just need to be aware of it and advocate for it, for sure.
What are some of the other things that people can look forward to when they pick up a copy of The Hormone Shift?
Oh my goodness. I wrote this book because I really wanted to encourage and inspire women that there was a better way, right? That this conversation was deeper than debating whether to take hormones or not take hormones, that hormones themselves really build upon a healthy foundation. And that healthy foundation includes your gut, your liver, many of the things we've talked about today, along with your energetic and emotional health. All of those really lend themselves to good hormone balance. So I wanted to widen the lens when we talk about hormones and hormone balancing. So at any age, honestly, it's written for all women. However old you are, there's a section for you. I talk about the 5 hormone shifts. I talk about how to find your dominant hormone pattern. Do you have estrogen dominance, or do you have low progesterone? Do you have a thyroid issue? Really helping you to tease that out. Because if we can get efficient, right? If we can help you identify the main idea, then eating and what to take and how to exercise and self-care all get lined out beautifully, right? It's when there's all this noise about what's happening with me, I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to do everything, that's really fatiguing and demotivating. And I wanted to take that sort of out of the picture. So there is a plan in there to reset your hormones. It gets into these east-west concepts, a sort of holistic way of doing it, and really leads you to a point where you can make that decision. Was this enough? Do I really need anything more from a hormonal standpoint? Or is just simply taking care of some of these things leading me down the right path?
Awesome. What's the best place that people can pick up a copy?
Oh my gosh, it's everywhere books are sold, but of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the places.
Awesome. All the places.
All the places.
Well, this has been amazing.
Thank
By the
you.
way, the foreword is by Gwyneth Paltrow. And this book is phenomenal. This is essential reading.
I hope so.
But I would argue that this isn't just for women, but if you know a woman, if you want to understand better what somebody that you care about is going through, just get some of this education, because for us, and I know, I've been with my wife almost 20 years.
Yeah.
I see personality changes from time
to
time.
What are you talking about?
But dare I even point it out if it happens, you know what I mean? But just for me to be aware and like, okay, it's this phase right now, and this is what she would probably need if I can help to create a supportive environment.
Absolutely.
Right? Because I might feel in a moment that I need to be, more assertive, but really I just need to listen more at this time, or be much softer. Sometimes she wants me to be more assertive or aggressive, whatever the case might be. But just learning a little bit can help us to better associate with each other. Caveat, no one said this is easy, all right? But it is worth it. And the Hormone Shift is available again everywhere their books are sold. You are awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Taz, everybody. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
It's been information withheld from us for a very long time, and it is behind so much frustration, misunderstandings, and the orgasm gap, which is it's a big abyss that like not even the world's like greatest daredevil could jump it.